Habits are a big part of who we are. What we do habitually makes up much of our daily activities. In fact, it's estimated that up to 70% of our waking behavior is made up of habitual behavior. People vary greatly, and if you can't form one habit easily, it doesn't mean you can't form other habits easily. It is said that it takes 21 days to form a habit. Some people say 18 days, others 21, 30, or even 60 days. So, which is it? Does it depend on the habit one is trying to form, or does it depend on the person trying to form the habit? A study published in 2010 by the first author Lally, Lally, found that for the same habit to be formed, it can take anywhere from 18 to as many as 254 days for different individuals. What I'd like to do is apply the scientific literature on how the nervous system learns and engages in neuroplasticity to habit formation, habit maintenance, and, if so desired, how to break particular habits. I'd like to give you a tool gleaned from research in psychology literature. With each repetition of a habit, small changes occur in the cognitive and neural mechanisms associated with procedural memory. Let's talk for a second about what procedural memory is. In the neuroscience of memory, we distinguish between episodic memory and procedural memory. Episodic memory is the recall of a particular set of events that happened, whereas procedural memory involves holding in mind the specific sequence of things that need to happen for a particular outcome to occur. Think of it like a recipe, a protocol, or, for the sake of exercise, sets and reps, or a particular course that you're going to run or cycle, or the number of laps you're going to swim and how you're going to perform it. It's clear that for anyone trying to adopt new habits, getting into the mindset of procedural memory is very useful for overcoming the barrier we call limbic friction. How do you do that? Well, a simple visualization exercise doesn't even have to be done with your eyes closed. Often, when we hear visualization exercise, we think about sitting in the lotus position with eyes closed, trying really hard to visualize something. It doesn't need to be anything like that. It can simply be, if you are deciding to adopt a new habit, to think about the very specific sequence of steps required to execute that habit. I'll use a trivial example, but this could be applied to anything. Let's say I want to get into the habit of making myself or someone else in my household a cup of espresso every morning. I would actually think through each of those steps. Walk into the kitchen, turn on the espresso machine, draw the espresso, and so on. Walking through each of those steps from start to finish. It turns out that just that simple mental exercise done once can shift people toward a much higher likelihood of performing that habit regularly, not just the first time, but as they continue into the days and weeks that follow. That's remarkable to me, and the literature is really robust. Now, I'd like to discuss a second, and what I think is perhaps the most powerful tool for being able to acquire and stick to new habits. The tool I'm referring to is something called task bracketing. The neural circuits associated with task bracketing are basically the circuits that allow you to learn any new type of habit or break any habit you'd like to break. We have in our brain a set of neural circuits that fall under the umbrella term of the basal ganglia. The basal ganglia are involved in action execution, meaning doing certain things, and action suppression, meaning not doing certain things. In the experimental realm, these are referred to as go, meaning do or no-go, don't do certain things. Some of us find it very easy to do certain things, but harder to not do other things. Some people have a lot of no-go type circuits that are very robust, and they have a lot of behavioral constraint, but they have a harder time getting into action. Some people have a perfect balance of both, but I've never met one of those people. Task bracketing involves a particular set of neural circuits within the basal ganglia. We have specific circuits in our brain devoted to framing the events that happen just before and as we initiate a habit, and just after and as we terminate a habit. In other words, it acts as a sort of marker for the habit's execution, but not the execution of the habit per se. This is very important because task bracketing underlies whether or not a habit will be context-dependent, whether or not it will be strong and likely to occur even if we didn't get a good night's sleep the night before, even if we're feeling distracted, or even if we are not emotionally inclined to do something, or if we are completely overwhelmed by other events. If the neural circuits for task bracketing are deeply embedded in us, meaning they are very robust around a particular habit, then it's likely that we're going to go out for that zone 2 cardio no matter what, that we're going to brush our teeth no matter what. In fact, brushing our teeth is a pretty good example because, for most people, even if you got a terrible night's sleep or even if everything in your life is going wrong, chances are, unless you're very depressed, if you're going to leave for work or even if you're not, that you're still going to carry out the behavior of brushing your teeth in the morning. I would hope so, actually. But you are probably less likely to perform particular habits that are not what you deem as necessary. But if you think about it, brushing your teeth, exercising, eating particular foods, maybe engaging socially in particular ways, you are the one that places any kind of value assessment on which ones are essential and which ones are negotiable. So task bracketing sets a neural imprint, a kind of fingerprint in your brain of this thing has to happen at this particular time of day, so much so that it's reflexive. While it is important to think about the sequence of events that would be required in order to engage in that behavior, that procedural memory visualization exercise we talked about before will help. There is also a way that you can orient your nervous system toward this task bracketing process so that your nervous system is shifted or oriented towards the execution of a given habit. This is sort of like warming up your body to exercise. When the dorsolateral striatum is engaged, your body and your brain are primed to execute a habit, and then you get to consciously insert which habit you want to perform. If you are considering adopting a new habit or if you are trying to break a habit, it's very useful to think not just about the procedural aspects of what you're going to do, but also about the events that precede and follow that particular habit and the execution, or at least the effort to execute that habit. What you're doing is you're casting a kind of spotlight around a bin of time or a set of events for which dopamine can be associated. What does this look like in a practical sense? Well, again, I'll just try to use very simple concrete examples, but this could carry over to anything. Let's say I were someone who has a hard time getting in that 30 to 60 minutes of Zone 2 cardiovascular exercise mid-morning. What I should do is positively anticipate the onset and the offset of that session. Right, so thinking about leaning into the effort, going out and doing that Zone 2 cardio session, and I should think about how I'm going to feel after. So, not just thinking about how great I'm going to feel after, but also thinking about how hard it's going to be at the beginning, and then trying to reward myself subjectively for the entire experience. In other words, start rewarding task bracketing in addition to rewarding the execution of the habit itself. I'll get into the specific tool for breaking habits, capture the sequence of events, not that led to the bad habit execution, but actually to take advantage of the fact that the neurons that were responsible for generating that bad habit were active a moment ago and to actually engage in a replacement behavior immediately afterward. Now, this is really interesting and powerful because I would have thought that you have to engage in a replacement behavior that truly replaces the bad habit behavior, right? That you would have to be able to identify your state of mind or the sequence of events leading into the bad habit. But rather the stage or the period immediately after the bad habit, execution is a unique opportunity to insert a different type of what we would call adaptive behavior. But that could be any behavior that's not in line with the bad behavior. Let's give an example. Let's say you find yourself trying to do focused work, but you pick up your phone, disappointing yourself for picking it up. Of course, you could just put it down and re-engage in the work behavior, but if you were good at that, you probably wouldn't have picked up your phone in the first place. So, what turns out to be very effective is to engage in some other positive habit. Now, this has two major effects. The first one is that you start to link in time the execution of a bad behavior to this other good behavior. In doing so, you begin to recruit other neural circuits, other neurons, that can start to somewhat dismantle the sequence of firing associated with the bad behavior. In other words, you start to create a kind of double habit that starts with a bad habit and then ends with a good habit. This seems to create enough of a temporal mismatch so that recognizing when you're heading toward the bad habit becomes more apparent to you. So again, I want to make this very concrete. Let's say that the behavior is reflexively picking up one's phone. You do that, think, "Oh goodness, I did it again." Here's what you're going to do. You would set the phone down and then engage in some other positive behavior that you've deemed positive. And here, it's very subjective, so it's hard for me to give an example that will necessarily make sense to everybody. But perhaps you're working on hydration, so maybe you go have a glass of water. Maybe you are trying to do breath work or something. Maybe you are trying to enhance your language speaking skills, and so you go and spend 5 minutes doing a particular type of language learning. You literally exit whatever you are doing and perform that other new positive habit immediately afterward, even for a short period of time. If you find this video helpful, be sure to like and share this video with those who might benefit from it, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell icon to get notified for new videos. Thanks for watching and see you in our next video. Video by Mahan Growth Lab.